and admit all. Hello everybody, welcome to the SEN seminar for today. We're going to give it a few more minutes for other people to join. Feel free in the chat to say any hellos. We've got some really nice group of people here again, some familiar faces. And then once we give it a few more minutes, then I'll introduce our speaker for today. And today, unfortunately, we have to miss Spencer, so I'm going to have to do lots of multitasking or multi-failing, depending on how you'd like to see it. So I'll do my best. So, and as usual, once we get started, feel free to add your comments and questions in the chat box. And then at the end, you know, I'll pick out some questions and you can unmute yourself there. People are coming in fast now, so we'll just give it a few more minutes before we start. Flavia, so we get started. So good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the Centre of Educational Neuroscience Seminar Series. My name is Dr. Jo van Herwijk, and I'll be hosting today's session. And it's a great pleasure to introduce Dr. Flavia Santos for today's talk. I'll have to multitask here and read. So Dr. Santos is an Ad Astra Fellowship and an assistant professor at University College of Dublin since 2018. She obtained a BSc in psychology in 1994, but also did a residency in pediatric neurology and a specialization in pediatric psychology. Dr. Santos carried out a PhD in science at the Federal University of São Paulo and also an exchange with Durham University here in the UK. She completed fellowships awarded by the Foundation for Science and Technology in Lisbon, Portugal, as well as in Murcia, Spain, and worked as an associate professor at the University of Murcia in Spain. Dr. Santos offers consultancy to Sunny Numbers, a game developer, with regards to statistics anxiety, and she authored the book Developmental Dyscalculia. Her research interests target neuroplasticity and mathematical learning with a focus on intervention for children with mathematical learning disabilities and mathematics anxiety. And today she'll be talking to us around interventions for children with developmental dyscalculia, from musical training to digital games. Thank you very much, Flavia. The floor is all yours now.
Wow, hello everyone. Thank you very much, Jo. It was a great pleasure to receive your contact and your invitation. And also thanks Matt and Spencer for the opportunity to be presenting at the Center for Educational Neuroscience. So, so just to talk a little bit about myself. So I'm an Ad Astra at the UCD. I'm a member of the Affective, Behavioral and Cognitive Neuroscience department at the UCD, and I funded the UCD Music and Math Cognition Lab. So that's where I hope to do my future projects. Just for telling a little bit about my interests, I do advocacy for women in science and in STEM. I also do advocacy for Black in Neuro, and so these are my interests as well. So for today, I planned the following. So I will talk a little bit about numeracy deficits, not to give a lecture about it, but actually just to point which are the elements that we consider important when we are designing an intervention. Then I will present a numeracy musical training, which we designed and developed this training, and the non-instrumental musical training. Apart from that, I have another study which is with digital intervention. So that's the last item I will present. And then I will make some conclusions about all the studies together. I must say that those studies, all of them were carried out in Brazil, in Brazilian population. So like I said before, I hope from now on start to do projects also in Ireland. So we know that academic failure has a long-lasting negative impact for the individual and society. In fact, it undermines economic, social, and psychological outcomes in adulthood. So there is a clear, there are evidence that individuals with a low numeracy, they will present more symptoms of depression, eventually trouble with authority, lower occupational status, and lower incomes. Also, the annual cost of low numeracy worldwide is high. So for instance, in the UK economy is higher than 7 billion. And when we think about how the numeracy deficits are, we must remember always that it's not just about arithmetics. Actually, children might have number processing deficits. Also, although we start to think about the developmental dyscalculia when children are at school, but actually, if you have the opportunity to assess them earlier, you see that children who are going to have developmental dyscalculia, they have already symptoms early in life. So it's important to look at them at a young age. Another characteristic is that they might have slowness, which means that they have difficulties to automatize their understanding of quantities and numbers. So that's another issue we must take into account. And we also see heredity. So usually when you interview parents of children with developmental dyscalculia, they will say, well, actually, I also had the difficulties when I was a child, or we will see difficulties in brothers and sisters of the child who has the diagnosis. And according to twin studies, we know that monozygotics have a higher probability than dizygotics, and both together higher probability than individuals in general population to show those deficits. And besides, we know that Turner syndrome, for instance, women with this X chromosome, lacking this X chromosome, they will show, among other characteristics, deficits in mathematical skills like subtracting or calculation, estimation, and they also have parietal deficits according to neuroimaging studies. And talking about neuroimaging, we don't have a single neural substrate for numerical deficits, but we know that if you think about it in terms of like the brain as using a metaphor, the brain as an orchestra, we would say that you have different areas acting in different times and producing something harmonic. And if we could consider a regent for this, we would say that the regent is possibly parietal hub. So everything comes or goes from or through the parietal lobe. And another element that's important is that we see a component which is emotional. So we would see children with mathematics anxiety. It's not present in all cases, and is also present in children without deficits in mathematics, but it's still one characteristic that we might see in this population. And finally, we must say that usually the deficits, they are persistent. So if a child presents this profile, you probably will see an adult in adult age equivalent symptoms, despite of the fact that they might improve in some aspects, because of course they are intelligent people, they will learn with use other strategies and so on, but the deficits will be persistent. So bringing this to the table, I must say that one of the main things we must consider is intervention. And first thing to say about interventions, that what we would use in the general population may not work properly in children with developmental dyscalculia. So that's why we need specialized intervention for children with developmental dyscalculia. And the second thing we must say about it is that we have a few studies which have been showing different strategies, but we know that we still having trouble with sample size, control groups, things like this. So we still seeing our options with caution. And even when I'm presenting my work, I must talk to you with caution as well. So overall, we can say that there are a few successful interventions, at least successful studies. And then we can say that computer-assisted intervention is an option, musical training, neuropsychological studies, pedagogical, not any kind. So I would point here, especially Ukulano and colleagues, but a few others that might be appropriated for children with developmental dyscalculia. And for the MAVS anxiety symptoms, also there are some interventions in progress at the moment. I can tell you, we just had the release of this recent paper of us and the progress in brain research. And we can say that, at least for the moment, we cannot suggest transcranial stimulation as an alternative for treatment, not yet. And it's not because the evidence it's negative, but it's because there's no evidence. So we are lacking studies to test these hypotheses. Okay, so these are the general comments I would like to make about numeracy deficits. So let's get started. I would like to talk about musical training. Well, music is apparently present since prehistory and is present in all cultures. And music, conceptually, we could say that it is a combination of melody, rhythm, and harmony, which is used to recreate the ear. We can say that music has in common with mathematics the fact that it is an organized language, in the sense that it is a system of rules that coordinate a series of basic elements. We know all the connections between music and math. And for instance, Pythagoras developed the Harmonic Series, which applies for music, and which is a series of numbers related to whole numbers ratios, so fractions. There are also other evidences in longitudinal studies that the time spent on music practicing predicts working memory development and also producing maths benefits. And nowadays, several universities, including UCD, are trying to integrate STEM studies with arts. So there's a way to integrate and produce better science in both areas. So I know that as a scientist, you are actually asking to me, okay, beautiful story about music, but I want to know if it can produce neuroplasticity. So I selected this study just to give you one basic, very basic evidence. So in this study, they had a rhythm discrimination task, and they asked children and adults to perform this task. It's very simple, like this. Individuals would listen sounds like this, and they would say if they are the same or different. And when they asked children to answer for this, children replied usually with bilateral activation on temporal lobe, which is the area of the auditory cortex. So they are paying attention to the sounds. But when adults were answering apart from the auditory cortex, they were also activating here bilaterally the parietal lobe. So we wonder if perhaps they were thinking in a different direction, like this meaning 1 and this meaning 2. So this is the performance of non-musicians. And when we have musicians, they activated the same areas, but also they activate frontal lobe, especially the prefrontal the inferior frontal gyrus and the Herschel's gyrus, that area. If we try to understand the mechanism by which this neuroplasticity occurs, we could take advantage of the 4E cognitive science, because according to this theory, we would say that music can be embodied, embedded, extended, and inactive. And because of those properties or characteristics, it will always lead to multimodality and multisensorial responses. And then it leads also to different cognitive functions, like when you are listening or singing or playing a musical instrument, you are using your memory, your attention, you are regulating your emotions. So all those elements will be together, creating a very robust effect in brain development. So let's get started about the Numeracy Musical Training, which is the intervention that I will present for you today. So the NMT is based on errorless learning technique. So that's very important, which means that the tasks are always starting in the easiest level as possible. So you ensure that children will learn all the procedures properly. So when you avoid procedural errors, the performance will be always better. Another element that we consider crucial in this sense is that group music practice is indicated to improve empathy, cooperation, communication, coordination. And so that's perfect to use with children as well. So in this study, we had 57 Brazilian preschoolers at age 5, balanced by gender. And they were all Portuguese speakers. They had no formal musical experience, and they had a low middle class. They were from middle class. They were studying in a public school, preschool in São Paulo State. And this is the study design. So we had randomized allocation of the participants. The study was blind. It means that the person who was assessing neuropsychologically had no information about the intervention. The person who was doing the intervention had no information about the neuropsychological assessment. It's also important to point that the person who was doing the intervention was a music educator, so a person with qualifications for it. Okay, and then we had these two groups, and they had a pre-test and a post-test assessment. The control group had the business as usual, and the experimental group had the NMET. And then we use a protocol with different neuropsychological tasks. And just one final comment about the intervention. It was designed to be 8 sessions in small groups with duration of 45 minutes per session. We had 4 sessions just with body and voice, and other 4 sessions including musical instruments, recorded sounds, and also in some moments guitar or piano live. And the sessions were structured in terms of numeracy systems. So we had 2 sessions about cardinal, 2 sessions about verbal numerical system, 2 sessions about symbolic numerical system, and 2 sessions about the ordinal system. And in each single session, we had 3 components. One was melodic, the other was rhythmic, and the other was pitch. And the results are very nice, because since we are training numeracy using music, we would expect and wish to see precisely an effect in counting and addition and subtraction, in which just the experimental group had a better performance from pre to post test in both cases. We also found a non-expected result, which was a far transfer for phonological working memory. It was the backward digital recall. This was a computerized task, and children performed better after the intervention, just the experimental group. So here, I would like to present you another study now with the non-instrumental musical training. And I think this is, it's important to put some context in this. I remember when I was publishing the previous study, one of the reviewers asked precisely that, well, you managed to get this statistically significant results, the design seems consistent and everything, but I have a question for you. Is this because you had a numerical element, or it was because of the musical training per se? And then, although it's not exactly the same training, but it has similar components. So I can tell you that now I will show you the impact of the music on the musical training for children. And another difference in comparison to the previous study is that the previous was an stimulation project. So children were preschoolers without any deficits. And here we are working with children with low achievement in maths. So we had 14 sessions, also in groups, once a week, per 60 minutes, and the tasks were rhythmic or melodic. And before I show you the graphics or explaining you the graphics, I would like to explain a little bit about the analysis. So we did in this study cluster analysis. So we did this measurement twice, before and after the intervention. So before the intervention, the cluster analysis found two clusters. The cluster 1 had 26 children and the cluster 2 had 20 children. And then when we did the second measurement, we've got a change in numbers. So the cluster 1 now had 34 children and the cluster 2 had only 12 children, which means that 8 children changed their performances significantly enough for the cluster analysis detect them as part of the control group. So that's very nice. And then when we compare both groups, performance pre-training and post-training, we had several tasks here represented. So dictate of numbers, reading numbers, positioning number in this analog scale, and several other tasks, counting, etc. So what we can see is that both groups improved a little bit after the intervention, but we can see that the group with developmental dyscalculia had particularly, that I would like to highlight, is this result, which is the task positioning in this scale. So according to an fMRI study from Cushion and colleagues, improvements after intervention in this task are associated with changes in the brain functioning. So that's also nice to comment. And after doing this, we were very concerned about outcomes, if they would last or not. So we did this follow-up assessment in this sample. So that's the study I was describing so far. So you have the baseline, 7 initial sessions, mid-test, 7 final sessions. And just to point here, they were counterbalanced. So half of the sample started by the rhythmic and half started by the melodic task. And then they had the post-test. And this is the time which is important here, the non-music training period, which was 10 weeks. And after that, we did the follow-up assessment. And then if you're looking at the graphics on the right side, you'll see on the bottom, the legend. So in red, it's baseline, then you have mid-test, post-test, and follow-up. And when you're looking at those bars, you see the asterisks suggesting changes across the time, if some of them were persistent. In the case, we can say that number production, number comprehension, and calculation, where the composites who actually improved and remained with the successful results. So I just would like to point here an example very clear, which is number production. Look at the red bar. The children at this point had less than 10 points. And if you look in the fourth bar, which is the follow-up measurement, they had more than 90 points in 90% of correct responses in the task. So it's really nice to see that. So these are the things I would like to say about musical training. We did a few other studies, but I think these are the most important ones. And I will be happy to comment about it if you want at the end. Now let's move on to computer-assisted interventions. So we know that interventions effectiveness is associated with direct and assisted instruction, training of basic arithmetic competencies. And also other systematic reviews showed that short interventions are more efficient than longer interventions. And it should be, some studies suggest that we should have adaptive interventions. So here I point a list of different interventions that were designed first, but I don't have the time to comment it. So I'll go straight forward for the Calcularis, which is the one we used in the study in Brazil. So the Calcularis, it has 17 games, which I will explain later. It's a combination of tasks, and which the child will play between 15 and 20 minutes per day, 3 to 4 times a week, with an expectation of around 12 weeks. And child can play from any place as long as they have a computer and a tablet connected to the internet. And the good thing of being online is that you have real-time progression assessment. So these are the combinations of tasks. So you might have subitizing, estimating, transcoding, number line, comparison of quantities or numbers, and the 4 operations. And it goes also with a progression on with if. So you might start with from 0 to 10 and reach 0 to 1,000 according to the level of the child due to the algorithms and with the practicing. So I will point here now the 3 studies that discuss effectiveness of these Calcularis. So the study of Kaiser, the study of Rocher, and the study of Kohn and colleagues in all of them. And one thing in common among those interventions is that they were assessing children from 2nd to 5th grades. And the study of Kaiser, they had children with math difficulties. In the study of Rocher, it was children with a typical development. And on the study of Kohn, there was children with developmental dyscalculia. In all studies, the design was randomized, and they always had a trained group in comparison to an untrained group. In the study of Rocher, they also had one spelling task, which is not related to numbers. And then children were trained for more than 24 sessions. In the study of Kohn, even more than 42 sessions. And the outcomes were consistent, so subtraction, and including accuracy and speed, which improve in both. Then also Rocher found number line improvements, and Kohn found number line and additions as well. And the study of Kohn also identified that the benefits were stable after 3 months. So that's really, really positive. So what are the points I would like to consider here? The studies were carried out in Germany or Switzerland. They still was carried out with children which are German speakers. Both countries are well developed, have a high standard education, and that's why I think we should consider if this would be also switchable for other countries. So for instance, in the case here, I'm selecting Brazil. Brazil has impressive numbers in positive sides and also in negative sides. So for instance, it's a population of 8 million square kilometers, 212 million inhabitants. The GDP is 3.08 trillion, so it's the 8th economy in the world, so it's still a rich country. The Human Development Index is 0.76, so higher development. So when I say those things to you, you probably think, well, it should be equivalent, right? But then you must consider that Brazil has a history of slavery, colonialism, and dictatorship. And especially right now, lots of corruption. So this leads to, this scenario leads to high inequity Gini index, which is 54 points in Brazil. And the inequities will have an impact directly on education. So if we're looking at, for instance, data from PISA study, reading, mathematics, and science, in blue, you see the blue line is the average of OECD, which is about 500 points. And when we're looking at that data from Brazil, you see that the performance is very below those numbers. And especially in mathematics, which is here in the center, you see that from 2003 to 2018, there's no significant progress. In fact, the highest point was 389, so very, very low. And then we also know that Brazil has a problem with access to technology, which would be something to boost learning at schools. But turns out that at home, children usually don't have computers. So we see here in this survey about desktop in blue, portable computers in orange, and then tablets. We see that, for instance, in 2019, less than 45% of the children in urban areas had computers at home. And we must think that in rural areas, these numbers will be even lower. So another thing that we can say is, okay, they don't have computer at home, but they will have at school. And I think it's very important to point here, because usually we are thinking always with the mind of developed countries. And in developing countries, the scenario is really different. So for instance, here, teachers were measuring, and I want you to pay attention to the blue bars, which represents strongly hinders. So teachers said that 82% of teachers said there is insufficient number of computers per student, insufficient number of computers connected to internet, obsolete or outdated equipment, low speed and of connection of the internet, and other issues. So it's really hard to do, to use it at schools. So what are the characteristics of our study in this topic? So first of all, we are an independent research group. We are testing Calcularis efficacy in a developing country, in a community which is barely familiar with computers. We are training in groups rather than individually. We are contrasting a non-adaptive training, and we are testing a shorter protocol. So the study was carried out at the São Paulo State University, UNESP, and it was random and blind as it should be. We had pre and post assessment in cognitive functions, and we allocated children in 3 different groups. So first is adaptive, which is the one who actually received the Calcularis, and then the waiting group, which had the business as usual. Obviously, the training was offered for this group after the intervention. And then the non-adaptive group received a demo version of the Calcularis. So they were having the same situation. They were playing at school in groups all together, but they were using one intervention that had no adaptive features. So it's important to say here that it's not exactly a placebo, okay? It's a weaker intervention, let's say. And then we calculated the sample size, and to detect our children, remember what is the prevalence of developmental dyscalculia. So it's about 5 or 6% of a population. So to get sample size to do the study, we had to start with 888 children. And then we found 87 with a parent profile of developmental dyscalculia. They went to a neuropsychological assessment, and then the remaining children were allocated in groups. I will not discuss the attrition just for a question of time, but they are described here, 21% only as well. So we had 66 children, third and fourth graders with developmental dyscalculia. So all of them had the diagnosis, okay? And they were Portuguese speakers. They were from low and middle class. So just to give an idea, the monthly income was about $500 or 500 euros, very little. And they were in public schools in São Paulo state. So these are the instruments we use in our protocol. And it's important to say that in the baseline, the three groups were absolutely equivalent in terms of age, gender distribution, IQ, arithmetics, reading, except for writing, where we can see a slightly better performance in one of the groups. And the results, fortunately, were successful. So we've got an interaction between groups and time, which means that the adaptive group had an improvement from pre-test to post-test, and this improvement was higher than what was observed in non-adaptive group and also in the control group. Also, we found equivalent results for subtraction. So that's a consistent effect. So overall, we can say that waiting list is something that we definitely should not have outside the scenario of research. So that's something that we must change. It must increase the awareness of the community, the policymakers, and the society that children with deficits, they need intervention because they will not improve with time. That's no miracle, okay? So the non-adaptive group, they had an improvement in some numerical tasks. So at least we can say that training early numbers was beneficial for them. And we also must consider the impact of group sessions in motivation and the fact that they were monitored all the time. They were receiving this intervention with support. And then the adaptive group, okay, we showed you before the statistics. So we can say that we found the differences, but I think more importantly, I must point here the individual differences on the outcomes, because if you're looking at this last graphic I'm selecting here, in yellow, you have pre-test, in green, you have post-test. And if you're looking at those words here, mild, moderate, and severe, these are impairments in the numerical cognition tasks, okay? So what we see is that the number of cases of moderate and severe, they decreased after the intervention. And the number of children who were actually classified as average on performance increased. So we can see that the intervention was successful, but it depends on the level of deficits or the degree of impairment the child will have. And also it points to us the need of considering that 20 sessions was great as a scientific study to show if the intervention has effect or not, but it doesn't mean that it's enough for children. So we would encourage more sessions, especially looking at this graphic here. So these are the main considerations that I can say about this study. So we did in a developing country using passive and active control groups. We're still seeing effects in the total score and in subtraction. And this was observed at least with 20 sessions of intervention. So just to summarize the findings, I would like to say that first of all, brief interventions, at least in our experience, produce near and far transfers. Intervention in mixed groups in our experience, seem to be more appropriate because it promotes inclusion, makes children feel comfortable with each other, and Calcularis improves maths performance. It's not new, but it's new in the sense that it's a developing country, so in children that has no support with technology, so that would be suitable for them as well. Although I highlighted the need of those groups, I definitely do not suggest here to use this individually for many reasons. We can discuss the reasons and after the end of my presentation. Music training improves maths performance as well. And the follow-up study was very important and showed that calculation remained better from baseline to follow up, but we also still seeing they were below the control group. So I just want to point here that it's improvement, it's not cure, okay? And then I just would like to mention, I cannot even share the name of the foundation, is still under strict embargo, but we were successful. We got a grant to develop this study, which is the Arithmos Project. So we do a collaboration between the UCD, University College Dublin, and the TUD, Technological University of Dublin. And in this study, we have a partnership between a social sciences researcher, which it's me, and the STEM researcher, which is Pier Paolo Dondio. So we will augment 2 digital educational games with adaptive features, and that's the novelty. It's specifically to address maths anxiety. And we hope to use to test if this intervention can improve maths performance and reduce maths anxiety. And we, the training will be at school. We will have children playing with each other, which is something very important. Also, we will engage teachers, and we will also provide opportunities for training at home individually. So we will do obviously an RCT study to detect the differences. So the game will be 3 times a week, 30 minutes for 6 weeks. And as outcomes, we are planning to have, first of all, the first augmented study for addressing mathematical anxiety. And also we will design one program for teachers to improve math anxiety management in class, because that is something that is really lacking, at least in our experience. And then we will do a cartoon video for helping children to increase awareness about this, because also parents, as we know, if parents have their own math anxiety and they don't know how to cope with that, they will lead math anxiety for their children as well. So that's the idea. So we hope to make teachers happier, parents happier, and children even more. So that's the project. And if always successful, we will be tackling in at least 6 different sustainable developmental goals. So I think it would be really nice. So just to finish, I must thank all parents, teachers, and especially children who embraced our studies. Professor Michael von Aster, because although we did an independent study, we had his support with information anytime we needed. He also introduced us for the Diebuster CEO. So, and the Diebuster CEO, Christian Vogli, was very helpful regarding the licenses to use the tasks in Brazil for free. So that's the nice thing. And I also would like to point amazing students who worked with me. Without them, nothing would be possible. So for the music side, I have Fabiana and Eder. And for the computer games, I have Liane and Jessica. All of them have already finished their studies, and they are wonderful researchers. And I also must acknowledge the undergraduate students who were the tutors on the computerized training on the schools. And then just before I finish, I just would like to make an announcement that our school is designing online research methods summer school. So it's still time for engage. So please follow us on Twitter. The address is here. And also get engaged and enroll. It's free the training, okay? And finally, I would like to say that because our new study will be funded, so we will be hiring very soon. So please stay tuned with my announcements on Twitter, or if you have interest, you can contact me directly. So thank you very much. I think this is it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Flavia, for a fantastic talk. There was lots of interesting points in there and things to make. So I would welcome anybody to type any questions into the chat, or otherwise raise your hand or put your video on, and then we can go and ask the question. So I wonder whether Brian, hello Brian, hope you're well. Do you have a question? Please unmute, yeah. Oh, you're still on mute.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, so just about Calcularis. How much time do the kids play Calcularis for, let's say in hours? And is the effect that you've got very interesting just because they're getting more maths than they were getting under the weighting protocol?
Okay, so the first question is, it's about 20 minutes per day.
20 minutes?
Yes.
Yeah.
In our study was 5 days a week because we had less time. So we had a more intensive approach. And other studies, they did three times a week and so on. The second question is if you think that is because they are training more or if it's because the training is really effective. Is it the point?
Well, in order to know that the training as such is really effective, it's a question of, are they just getting more maths, or is it about the specific program? Now, I know that you've got a control, but I don't remember the data with the non-adaptive form of Calcularis. But even that's just more time spent in maths. So I'm just wondering if you thought about how to separate out just more time on maths from the specifics of this particular training.
Okay, so first of all, like I said, we did 20 sessions because it was, just for the record, unfunded study. So definitely it was really huge and difficult to keep progressing with so huge project. So that was the reason. We really would like to have more sessions anyways. And that's, even all international studies had more than 24 sessions for every single child. So more time is for everybody. So that's one point. The second point is about the algorithm of the task. And that's the main thing here, because when you finish the training, each child will receive a report, and the report explains clearly what tasks the child was doing. So it's not the same task for every single child. It's precisely the tasks the child is in the need of. So you have a different profile for each one. It's very individualized. At the end, still individualized, which is amazing. So that's the point. So it's not just more, it's being specific for what the child needs.
Okay, that's great. Can I just have one follow-up on this? What were the criteria for assigning a child to the dyscalculia group?
All the children in this computer training, in the Calcularis training, had dyscalculia. All of them were neuropsychologically assessed using the ZAREC-R, which is a battery designed especially for the diagnosis of developmental dyscalculia. And the performance must be 1.5 standard deviation below the average, or 3 subtests also below 1.5 standard deviation. So we use those criteria because they are both, we use both for the final diagnosis, but also it's just, let's say that's the neuropsychological specialized task, but we also had IQ to confirm that they had performance. We test other skills like executive functions, attention. So it was a larger protocol. So that's why we can consider that they actually had the diagnosis.
All right, thank you.
Welcome.
Well, thank you, Flavia, for that answer, and Brian for the question, because it's also the same question that appeared in the chat by Maria Clara, who is also very grateful to you, Flavia, because she's a Brazilian researcher who's also about to start a study on developing interventions for children with dyscalculia. So I'm sure we can put you in touch now with each other to do this. I'm very lucky today that I'm in the office, and I'm actually able to meet people face to face. So Laura Uthwaite is with me and has got a question. So I'm just going to turn to Laura now.
Hello. Thanks, Flavia. That was really interesting talk. So my question, I think, was based on your your musical intervention, where you had the two groups, the control and the dyscalculia group. And what I was interested in was whether how you define the dyscalculia children, and like how you define that low achievement. And if there was any, when you were looking at the movement between the dyscalculia to the controls, you said that 8 moved up. Were there any children that went down? Were you able to like make sure that it was definitely like those uneven numbers at the end? If there were any children in the control group that moved down to the dyscalculia group, potentially through measurement error when you were doing the assessments at pre-test?
No, all checked, absolutely checked. It was very important for us, so we definitely checked.
No, definitely, yeah.
10 times, and yes, all children the 8 children which initially had a score equivalent to developmental dyscalculia improved and get, let's say, a normal score. So when we run the cluster analysis, the computer allocated them in the control group in the second moment. And the criteria for developmental dyscalculia was the same used in the computerized studies. So again, a battery specialized in developmental dyscalculia, and with a 1.5 standard deviation as the cutoff to define it.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Thank you very much, Flavia. We've got time for more questions, and there is one again in the chat here from Lilia, who says, well, if the results show that musical training improves maths performance, and if studies indicate that time spent on music enhances working memory, did you find any improvements in working memory using your musical training studies?
Yes, I did. I showed backward digital recall. Well, oh, Lilia, I know her. She's from Portugal. I'm big fan. That's lovely. Hi, Lilia. So yes, I definitely found an effect in working memory using the automated working memory assessment, the ALMA. So using the backward digital recall, we found an improvement in children.
Okay, thank you.
Great. Yeah, everybody already asked for my questions as well, which was around, and actually you answered my question, which was about, you know, individual groups, to see indeed that, you know, there's wide variability, and not, you know, not everybody might be the same, right? So, yes. I think that's very interesting to look into interventions as well. Are there any more questions you'd like to ask Flavia, or comments for that reason? Oh, sorry, Rebecca. Yes, hi.
Hi, Flavia. It's so nice to see you in person. So I back onto the working memory. So you said you saw an improvement. I didn't pick up on exactly how that was measured or how the improvement in maths was measured, but I just wondered, you probably had considered whether that's a bidirectional relationship, because working memory, it's an element of sustained attention. So children who have better attention are more likely to spend more time on their music lessons or whatever, you know, the music measure was. So did you do anything to see whether that was actually in that direction?
Yes, actually, that brings me to a historical response. Our first study that I didn't show here was with musicalization for children. And it was just a study with an undergraduate student. And we found exactly this, that children who was having this musicalization was better in working memory. And then we were wondering, what's the cause, what's the consequence, and things like this. But in this initial study, precisely, we couldn't infer nothing because we had no pre and post test. But now we do. So precisely the study I showed, in the pre-test, in the baseline, the groups were equivalent in working memory. and just the experimental group improved after the musical training. So we can, in this particular case, assume that there is an effect of the musical training. And because the control group didn't change in the same period of time, we cannot consider that, for instance, oh, the school or the outside stimulation. No, because just the group were under experimental activation improved. So, yeah.
Can I be cheeky and ask a follow-up? Can you just remind me how you measured working memory?
Using the automated working memory assessment, ALMA.
So all of it. So you have verbal,
no, in this study, we used 4 tasks because they were preschoolers. So definitely you cannot use an entire protocol, but we had 4 tasks, 2 verbal and 2 non-verbal. And then in the digital backward, we got this difference.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you very much. I think, you know, we're getting closer to 5 o'clock and we've got no more questions. I think it's time to thank Flavia again for a fantastic talk around, you know, music intervention and how to improve mathematical abilities. Flavia, we will also tweet around your online research methods course. So if you send us the link, you know, then I'll definitely do that again. And I'd welcome all of you. Thank you all for who are present today and for listening in and your questions. Next week is our final Centre of Educational Neuro seminar for this academic year. And, you know, I know that all of those here have an interest in maths. So we're going to end with another fantastic talk around maths development by Tammy Campbell, looking at teachers' perceptions and self-concept in children, what that means if you've got how teachers teachers' behavior impacts on self-concept. There you go. So I'll more on that next week, but thank you again, Flavia. Thank you all for being here, and I hope we can all see you again next week for our final SEN seminar talk.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, and take care.
Take care.